You got the phone? We're going to make some calls to the Almighty God, just as the prophets, the pro-Trump prophets of God do. Louisiana right now, there is several constitutional amendments that they're proposing, one of which deals with taxation of churches, property tax particularly in this case. I've got a guide to these particular amendments, and I want to read just very briefly what is at stake here relative to the possibility. They're not going to tax, they're just taking out a certain provision within the Constitution of the state of Louisiana, not our federal Constitution, about taxing churches and nonprofits more largely, taking that out of the Constitution, putting it back into the state's hands to be able to choose to, with a 2/3 vote of the state legislature, to charge churches with taxes. I am a firm believer that taxes should be levied against churches like they are any other business or entity in the United States. I think that if you have a certain charitable function, you should have write-offs for those certain charitable activities. But if you're a prosperity preacher who's driving around in a $100,000 SUV, like Shane Vaughn in this case, I don't know the exact price of his Cadillac Escalade that he proudly carts himself around in, he should pay taxes. His income should be taxed like anybody else. He's got a job like anybody else. What value is he providing that should be free from the taxes the rest of us pay? But here's the proposed change. The amendment would move some property tax exemptions and provisions to state law, making it easier for lawmakers to change them. It would also toughen the requirements for legislative passes of new property tax breaks and change the rules governing property tax charges on a business's inventory. So, and then here's a little added information here. While the property tax breaks for most nonprofit organizations would be moved out of the Constitution, religious nonprofits would maintain a specific exemption from all parish property taxes for churches, residential housing for clergy, priests or nuns, and seminaries or other educational institutions that train people for religious ministry. I don't believe any of that is necessary. I don't live in Louisiana, so I don't have a dog in this fight. But just general fairness, I think, would dictate that. Now, where the phone comes in, we're going to talk to, we may end up talking to some deity of the thousands that are out there, but we're going to talk about Shane Vaughn and his conversation with Tony Spell, a convict. I don't remember exactly what he was convicted of, but he did a little jail time, Tony Spell. And here he is whining and bemoaning the you can't tax what is God's. This land is God's. You cannot tax it. It's so good. It's so good because the house I live in is also on God's land, and yet there is a property tax assessed to the land that my house is on. Is God only own the land that churches are on and not everything else? So why are you free from this particular exemption? It's a quandary, is it not? Anyway, well, while they're talking, I'll get on the phone and we'll get some answers here. But watch this, Tony Spell explaining why he should be exempt from the taxes that the rest of us pay.
So what does this mean for us? So a 501c3 is granted federal exemption from taxes, but that also grants you in the state of Louisiana exemption from property taxes. So we don't pay property taxes as a church. So right. Let me pose a thought-provoking question, because already, the mainstream thought is, and the media is, it's now a national story. Well, why should a church be granted preference over a secular institution? If a secular institution has to pay taxes, property taxes, then the church should. Nothing, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth.
That's correct.
Out. So, number one, how do you tax what isn't ours? The church belongs to God.
That's
Matthew
right.
16:18, it's God's church. 2 Timothy 3:15, it's God's church. Ephesians 5:24, it's God's church. He
Oh,
bled for
hallelujah.
it. He died for it. Therefore, you can't tax something that isn't mine to begin with. I'm a steward. You're a steward of your
That's right.
gifts, of what
That's
God has
right.
entrusted to us. One sovereign entity cannot tax another sovereign entity. Now, the church is sovereign. Just like the United States can't tax Australia. They're two
Right.
sovereign entities. Leave them alone. That's where the church is. We are not equal to secular organizations or
No,
entities.
sir.
This land belongs to God. I am a
Amen.
steward of what God has entrusted me with.
Yeah. So that's, you don't know that guy. It's not yours. Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. Oh, he hung up. There you have it. I was on the phone with the creator of the universe who said, nah, he agrees with me, not with him. So look, I don't know what to tell you. You can't argue with God. And it's just as valid that I was speaking to God as that when Tony Spell or Shane Vaughn does. You can't argue with it. What you can't argue with is his nonsense logic, though, right? That how can you tax what isn't mine? Well, you used the money that wasn't yours, that was God's, to buy your Cadillac Escalade, did you not? Shouldn't your income that God apparently pays you, shouldn't that also be taxed, even though you're buying things that are material items with them? No? Strange. And again, I will say that if your church is on public land, if it's on land that's not taxed, why should any land be taxed? Because isn't this all God's land? And you're a sovereign entity. That one really stuck with me. He compares himself, his church, his little church in Baton Rouge, he compares it to Australia. How is it that your church and you are sovereign and separate and apart from the secular nature of the United States government and the government of Louisiana when you were arrested? You were subject to the laws, the sovereign laws of the United States of America, Pastor Tony Spell. Did you surrender just as a gag? Was it just a little show you put on? Or were you subject to the sovereignty of the United States and the laws herein? None of it makes any sense. They just want to grift. They want as much as they can take from their parishioners, from their congregation, and then not give back. They're not giving back to society. What charitable endeavors do they perform? As they are prosperity preachers, they want as much as they can get. Gross. Anyway, you can call me. I don't actually answer this phone because it's not plugged in, but it doesn't need to be plugged in when you're calling the Almighty, right? Anyway, our voicemail line is 714-576-4054. And of course, as always, you can email me daily@dollemore.com. There's also the ever-present YouTube comment section that is just awaiting your participation to help the algorithm share this content with new viewers. Anyway, I love and appreciate you very much. I'll see you next time. Be genuine. Take care of one another.